Hello! I'm here today with Wyatt Claypool from the National Telegraph. We're doing a podcast here, the topic being the Liberal leadership race and the various candidates who are potentials and running, and how they would do, or at least how we think they would do. So,
Are you super excited? Does this crowd of people excite you?
ah, well, considering that most people can't name the speculated candidates. Now, obviously, we know some more at this stage who are actually running. Chandra Area and Mark Bliss. I think that's his name. Doesn't really matter. Both
Frank
those.
Bayless.
Frank Bayless. That was close. That
The
was.
fact that you can't name him is just part of his appeal. That at least he's somebody who nobody knows.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. Um, but those guys are backbencher also rants. They're really trying to jockey to get maybe something in the future. They have very little hope of actually winning this. And we can see here with this Abacus data poll, there's really none of the big names running into this race. I mean, Jolie and LeBlanc have already stepped back from this, but and
Oh, and,
Anand
and Anita
has,
Anand as well.
yeah,
Yeah, and she's not even running at all for re-election.
no. So you're left with Freeland, Carney, and Clark, and Clark and Carney have basically zero name recognition, and Freeland has a little bit, but 51% is pretty bad. It's not a great place to start from. Oh, and I guess
And then they
these two
also
here.
had has Champagne said if he's running yet or no.
No, he hasn't said anything, and I can't imagine Gibo going anywhere.
Yeah, I don't suspect that if anyone hasn't announced that they're running yet, or is it Freeland or Carney, I really doubt they're going to start. What are you going to do? You're just going to be one of the also rans alongside Bayless and Chandra, and you're just going to look like you're just going to look like again just some person part of the also ran crew. And that's not exactly great for your for your campaign when you get stuck at the
No.
kids' table, leadership debates and whatnot.
And the tricky part with this too, I'm not sure the exact deadline the Liberal parties has set for when they need for the entrance fee, but even if they have until ballots are printed, which would probably be like late February, to be mailed out to people, to get $350,000 in that time period is actually kind of insane. That's a very small period of time. You would need 200 maximum yearly donors to donate to you, which is a non trivial task, especially when your party's doing terrible in the polls.
Well, the only advantage they basically have on this front is just because obviously so few liberal donors have been willing to give the party anything over the past couple of years that maybe there's some untapped veins of donor money right now. But yeah, like the problem is it's a 59-day leadership race. It all ends on March 9th, which really means it ends on March 1st because if people haven't mailed in a ballot by then, yeah, you can FedEx some in, your party can have drop boxes or whatever, or your campaign can, but that's only going to be in certain major cities. And so, like, really, the entire thing is only like a 50-day leadership race. And again, the first probably 10, 15 days is just going to be tied up in donor events trying to raise money. So the amount of time they're actually going to speak to average Liberal Party members is like zero.
And another wrinkling factor with this, which makes it very difficult, is as is pretty normal in parties. Their membership has atrophied between since the last election and now, and they only have until I believe it's what January 26th or 21st, one of those two dates, to sign up new members. So the membership is about as small as it's been in many years, because again we've been quite far from an election. And as Wyatt points out, the first week or two, they're going to be spending all their time trying to fundraise, or else they won't meet the entrance fee. So they'll have basically zero time to go try to energize and re-engage voters who've let their membership lapse, or bring new people into the party. Which I mean, trying to bring new people into the party is Christy Clark's literal only pathway to winning. She would have to sign up hundreds, thousands of people, the blue liberal, neoliberal types who've kind of faded off the Liberal Party since Trudeau took over.
Also part of her path would probably be making alliances with Frank Baylis for the Quebec Montreal vote, and having maybe Chandra Arya be, if he's even able to get in the race. If he signs up people, I guess that's also fine. If he has his own exclusive list of Hindu Canadians to push towards, Christy Clark, that she just has to basically come up the middle in like an Ed Stelmach fashion. But I don't think she's as little political game as Ed Stelmach has. I don't think Christy Clark even has that.
I mean, the big issue she really has is like, yeah, she could try to make these alliances and such, and that's a possibility. That's not, as you point out, it's definitely happened before. But she's so out of sync with the rest of the Liberal Party right now and the existing membership base that her and Baylis or Chandra would have to sign up so many people. It's kind of hard to imagine they could beat someone like Freeland or Carney if those two actually go in the race. Now, it's possible at this stage.
At this point, Freeland's even an underdog too. So you have to be the underdog who then can overcome the other underdog to then beat Carney, because they, at least I'm at least warm to the idea that Carney's probably the one that Team Trudeau wants, since he's like not the one who hasn't contradicted Trudeau publicly, unlike Freeland.
Mm-hmm. And allegedly, according to some of the sources that have been circulating in the media these days, about 30 MPs are backing Carney already, which is a decent start for endorsement-wise. Obviously, he hasn't officially declared, I don't think, but the rumor mill is that he has 30 backers. So that's a pretty strong position to start going into this.
There's this ridiculous talking point that, oh, well, the Liberal Party is very family oriented, in the sense of like, you're part of the Liberal caucus. We like you. We don't like people who aren't a part of it. It's like, yeah, but the real thing is, who does the leader want to take over? I think, like, Paul Martin probably took over in spite of who Chrétien wanted, but Paul was like a real character. And that's the main problem with the set of leadership candidates, as we're going to go through with the polling data here. None of these people have much of a personality. Like, you would never know who the heck they are unless you follow politics, like, religiously. You follow politics every day, so you know who Chrystia Freeland is. I'm shocked, and you can look at it right there. I'm shocked. Only 51% of people who are even active enough to take a poll even know who Chrystia Freeland is and can name her.
And the thing that's worth noting with this, too, is Abacus polls online, so you have to proactively be part of their panel. This isn't like they're randomly cold calling people. You have to be in this panel. So you have to be politically engaged enough that you joined a polling panel. And only 51% can name Freeland. The Deputy Prime Minister, the Finance Minister, the former Foreign Minister. Like, you don't really get anyone more high profile than that in cabinet who's not Trudeau himself.
And that's where Trudeau potentially is a much better leader than all of these people still, because you really cannot do any other than, like, you're just the nicest person ever. You're so charismatic, and when you do talk, but that usually doesn't come without gaining a lot of name recognition. But you cannot do an end run around name recognition and find some alternative metric that you're good in that overcomes that fact. And Mark Carney being like the avatar for the Trudeau PMO is pathetic when you look at him having 76% of people who cannot name him.
Mm-hmm.
You want somebody who's like kind of a household name. And Freeland doesn't even qualify for that, and he doesn't even have half of what she has.
And what you really get, I find, with a lot of these leaders here, so there's a model I have for, it's a very rough heuristic on how well a political campaign is going to go on a national or provincial level. And you basically need to fill 3 spots in your campaign team. You need a leader who's charismatic, who's interesting, can captivate audiences. People want to listen to them. They have interesting ideas. You have to have an economics guy who's good at math, good at economics, can sell the economic vision, and can basically run the finance ministry of their own power. And then you need a campaign dude. The campaign guy's going to be ruthless, possibly completely amoral, depending on the circumstances. And their whole purpose is just to make sure that you win and do whatever you need to win But most of these people don't actually meet close to anywhere on that. Like Carney himself, since he's from the background of a national banker, you could argue that maybe he'd be good as a money guy. But as everything I've seen of Carney as a person, he's just kind of bland and uninteresting, like most bankers tend to be from a political
If
standpoint.
anything, I'm wondering if he wanted that photo leaked of him standing with Ghislaine Maxwell because it's the only reason to talk about him.
Honestly, it would not be the first. I don't think that'd be the first time that someone has ever done that.
Yeah, like and here, this is it's a joke online. It is absolutely a joke, but Mark Garrettson would not be that bad of a candidate because he's kind of a clown. He's buffoonish. He's blustering. But like, why not? Why not? He's like the bizarro liberal version of Polyev. So why not give the boy a chance? Because all these other people, like you're doubling down on supporters you have, but not in like a strong doubling down, kind of like I guess we'll put in someone who's associated with Trudeau, which doesn't like I hope I don't have to explain this to liberal consultants, but nobody wants the diet version of Trudeau, especially with the terrible liberal brand attached to it.
Mm-hmm.
And someone made the point last week, and it is true. While the conservatives and liberals have the most sticking power as parties because of the overall trust and loyalty they've built up over time, the liberal brand has actually always kind of been a bit weak without a really, really strong personality of a leader behind them. They're almost kind of like the left-wing version of the Social Credit Party a little bit. As soon as you slot in someone who doesn't have the strength of character or like personality of like John Chrétien, you get Paul Martin getting a minority government, then losing 2 years later.
Mm-hmm.
Like Mike Ignatieff, Stefan Dion, all these people, John Turner, people who just are kind of boring middle management type personalities, bankers, professors. It just doesn't do well for the liberals. They need like effectively an eccentric to be their leader.
Yeah, and that's one of the big issues you really do see with this cross section of people here and the speculated people in the field. So, what I find, the whole thing about this leadership race idea is just crazy to me. Because if anyone watching has seen my last Canadian federal video, I broke down in that basically the problem with the Liberals right now has never been Trudeau for the most part. There has definitely been this situation where Trudeau has hurt the Liberal brand in the last couple of years. But the reason why the Liberals are unpopular, and the reason why Trudeau was hated, was not specifically because of Trudeau. It's kind of the other way around. Trudeau became hated because the Liberal policies are unpopular. And then you look at this cross-section of people running in the leadership race, especially the top heavy hitters. They're people really closely tied to Trudeau and the Liberal Party, and they're not that different. Like, if they're going to bother doing this leadership race, they really needed to pick someone who is acceptable to the current Liberal base, perhaps, but is as distinct as possible from Trudeau. And we really don't see that with these people. Like, if we scroll down here...
Oh, and yeah, in this poll, you're right. They do a poll on, do you associate this person as being similar to Trudeau or different? And most of these people like have extremely high similar ratings, and I guarantee you that it's actually not. It's more likely than not liberals who are going to vote in the leadership are willing to say these people are different, because who wants to say that the person they're voting for is the exact same as the guy who just got thrown out for being unpopular? And so the Canadians, they actually have to win, who are not liberal members. And obviously these polls are samples that we're looking at now are only people who knew who these people were, because you can't then say, do you think they're similar or not, if you already don't know who they are.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the thing is, people who know who they are going to be disproportionately liberals themselves. So this basically just shows liberals think they're different. Rest of Canadians, not at all.
Yeah, like the most quote-unquote different one here is Christy Clark. But the plurality still thinks she's more similar to Trudeau than she is different. And arguably, again, we don't really know Carney's exact political preferences, but we have seen how Clark governs. And yeah, Clark is probably the most different of this bunch. But contrary to what a lot of people will say, especially like NDP types, Clark is still ideologically a liberal. She was the leader of the BC Liberal Party, which is vaguely right-wing before it died. But a lot of liberals are vaguely right-wing. Like, if you look at like a right liberal or like a classical liberal, they're still vaguely right-wing in 2025.
Well, like the Chrétien was the leader of the Liberal Party, and he cut more spending than Ralph Klein did. There
Yeah.
are liberals who understand that, like that, and a lot of people, and this is where charismatic leaders come into effect. That the liberals will tend to go where a charismatic leader will lead them. And Christy Clark is a very typical modern liberal in the sense that she might have been in charge of a party that is sometimes center right with a lot of very socially progressive policies into it. But the thing is that she was trying to fall in line with the trend of like, I guess, like the growing liberalism of the country. So as the Harper years waned on and she was premier, she started acting more like the federal liberals. So she always flies true to form to what the Liberal Party is like. And honestly, this is a little bit of an aside. It was so stupid for her the other day to lie about joining the Conservative Party during the 22 leadership race to vote for Jean Charest. It's like that. Why are you trying to make yourself less different? You should be encouraging people to think of you as kind of like the progressive conservative interloper, because that's different than Trudeau.
And I think what it comes down to there, I'm not sure if who Clark has on her staff or advising her here, but I find a lot of political consultants, a lot of staffers, have absolutely no idea what they're doing. Like they're in their job by virtue of they got hired.
I'm going to send you a link to somebody who works on campaigns who's involved in this liberal leadership race. It is exactly what you would think it is. You should actually scroll through it in a bit. It's on your X.
Yeah, I'll take a look after this. But it's like, for example, a lot of campaign managers. Now, don't get me wrong, there are good campaign managers out there, and a good campaign manager is huge. But the thing is, it's very hard to objectively grade a campaign manager. This isn't like the private sector where it's very clear. It's like, you increased sales this much. Okay, you're doing a good job. It's very hard to grade campaign managers. So they kind of get promoted because they're on campaigns that win. But that doesn't mean that the campaign won because this campaign manager was good. So a lot of campaign managers get promoted really high up because they just lucked into being on winning campaigns, and they have no idea what they're doing. They think they do because they keep winning, but they're not good.
Some of the ones who aren't even good still end up getting more jobs. I saw an op-ed by somebody I know who works in campaigns on the social media side of things, who I know has been an abysmal failure, or at least worked for campaigns that won, that then later lost when they were the leader. And it's like, why is anyone listening to you? But the consultant world is so networking reliant that people who just have large networks are considered powerful, and because in a certain sense they are, even if their skills are either non-existent or extremely antiquated to the current situation. And so, like, and that's the thing. We see there's so much wish casting in this leadership race right now, and I find that is the superpower, the delusional superpower of so many campaign managers and political consultants and strategists, is that, and this is something that they actually put out today, Jagmeet Singh put out a video where the word fight is used like 70,000 times. Because we need people to think that Jagmeet Singh is a fighter. So let's say he's a fighter and he's fighting for you and he's not going to stop fighting and he's fighting Polyev, fighting. Didn't you know I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? And it's like, that's not going to make anyone think that he's tough. You have to show it. You know, it's kind of the whole show don't tell type rule that also applies to politics. And now people are trying to like wish cast Mark Carney as interesting and sage and wise. It's like he's not at all. And the thing is, you can't just say he is. You have to have him, or you can say he is, but he has to say it himself. He has to say something that makes people think that guy knows what he's talking about. You can't just say that guy knows what he's talking about.
And I think related thing to that too, I find you have a lot of campaigns or advertising methods in politics where people try to paint this leader or this candidate as an interesting person or potentially like a very cerebral, very intelligent person who thinks very deeply. And then in reality, you don't actually see them ever doing anything interesting. Like, for example, let's say they're in the Conservative Party for a less blatant, as an abstraction. They'll be the most painfully normal conservative in every way, shape, and form. They'll be like, we're going to cut tax, we're going to cut regulations, we're going to do this and this, but all painfully normal conservative things, things that no one would ever disagree on. But they'll articulate it in a very nice way, and they'll be like, "Oh man, this guy's really cerebral. They're really out there. They're really maverick because they speak well." And it's like, no, like no regular voter actually perceives it that way. They might think, "Oh yeah, that guy's a good communicator." But they're not going to say, this guy is an outside-the-box conservative, because they're just doing all the normal conservative things. And that's kind of what Mark Carney so far has struck me as. Everything I've seen or seen him say, he's like, okay, he's a pretty normal liberal.
Oh, yeah, I used to think metropolitan as soon as I see him every time, which is a typical liberal politician. They have this very metropolitan, suave attitude to how they maybe talk about policy when you hear them. But, like, that's like in a very abstract, ethereal value that not many people are actually going to care about. Like, here's the comparison I'd make from, like, the last conservative leadership campaign of what so many of these candidates are like, if not pretty much all of them, except Bayless and Chandra, all the ones I could imagine that might still jump in, is they all remind me of Scott Aitchison. And that doesn't mean literally anything good. That means he is a perfectly suitably nice man who is choosing to run for the leadership for I don't know what reason.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Scott Aitchison is like, you can tell that Scott Aitchison's campaign was made by and for consultants, made by and for strategy firm employees to give each other a pat on the back, because that was very well done, because they were just putting together a campaign to show that they could do it, because Aitchison wanted to raise his profile and had no intention of winning. But I shouldn't be getting the Aitchison vibe when you're trying to become the prime minister of the country.
Mm-hmm. And the thing there, I'm getting tongue-tied here. Another good comparison to previous conservative leadership races, if we all recall back to 2017 and how Scheer won the conservative leadership race in 2017, Scheer as a person really strikes me in a broad sense similar to Freeland or Carney, in that he is a good lieutenant to a strong leader, but he himself is actually not a strong leader. Like, Freeland can do the dirty work or the gritty work that the strong liberal leader wants to do. But of her own accord, if she is the leader, I don't think she has the chops for it. Just like Scheer showed us in 2019, he doesn't really have the chops to be the leader of the Conservative Party. But when you have a strong leader like Poilievre, Scheer suddenly becomes a very useful politician.
Oh yeah, and like Scheer, when you imagine him as Element, he's in like a committee meeting grilling somebody.
Mm-hmm.
If I was to give any, it's not even exactly a complimentary term, but if I was to apply to something that a word to Freeland that you could maybe interpret as somewhat positive, is I'd call her a bit of a shark, in the sense that she could be someone who's very cold and driven in pushing the government's agenda. She pushes it forward. She's kind of a bit of a bulldozer with getting stuff done, doesn't really react to criticism. But that's not the person that you want as the face of the party. That's why Trudeau kind of worked for the Liberals to an extent, because he was, at least until like the last 4 years, and I've never liked him, obviously, but he's kind of just the good vibes guy that helps push the agenda. In fact, I heard from somebody who was a Liberal up until 2016 that in Trudeau's first caucus meeting after they won in 2015, he basically admitted that, know what, I'm just here to make sure that we get the agenda across the finish line. If you have any questions, ask Gerald Butts. Which should not shock anyone that he had actually said that openly to people.
It goes back to one of the things I said earlier in this episode here. A lot of these, so like a successful campaign has the money guy, the leader, and the campaign dude. And what you really see where the Liberals started falling apart is around the end of, well, basically it's the SNC-Lavalin scandal, because SNC-Lavalin saw Jerry Butts leave the party and leave the PMO's office, and he was the campaign guy for the Trudeau government. And then it gets even worse. Like, by that point, once Butts is out, the party is running very poorly. The 2019 campaign was pretty abysmal. They succeeded mostly because Scheer didn't really have a strong message and a strong campaign, not because of their own merits. But then things get even worse come late 2020 when Morneau resigns, because he was the closest approximation to a money guy the Trudeau government had. I don't think he was necessarily the best finance minister in the world, but I think he was the best finance minister the Liberals had access to. And then since he left, you can really see the party just kind of spiraled on money. He wasn't tightly lipped, no. Like, they still ran big deficits for really no reason. But after he exits, the deficits hilariously explode for even less of a reason. Can anyone
I actually said in an episode of my own show today that if they were smart, they'd actually beg on the phone Bill Morneau for apologize for a full day, and then call him and beg him to run, because he actually has the reputation of being willing to criticize Trudeau since he left, and all of his scandals, quote unquote, could easily just be said, yeah, I just took the fall for Trudeau because he sucks, and that would actually be probably a smart move on their behalf, but I think party loyalty is still a very highly valued, characteristic in the party right now, to a point where it's not helpful. But you're right. In the terms of, we're probably on the C or D team right now when it comes to the Liberals. To make a music reference, it's like Van Halen getting rid of David Lee Roth and then swapping in Sammy Hagar, and now we just got rid of Sammy Hagar, and now we're on the Gary Sharon version of Van Halen.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, are technically some of the elements still there? Sure, but a singular person can be that special, spice that ends up making the whole thing work. Because Trudeau, that's the funny thing. Not much has actually changed since 2015, and it really demonstrates how important your point here is, that when you miss these three positions, or even if you still have a few of them, but if you don't have all of them, the entire thing doesn't work.
Mm-hmm. Because the key point of this trifecta, in my conceptualization, is these three people actually are in contention with each other because of their nature of being. The leader, in this case, kind of wants to push an ideological message or an ideological goal. And the campaign guy is going to be like, no, we can't do that because it's going to kill our position. It's going to look too far out, etc., etc. The money guy's going to be like, no, we can't do that either because we can't afford that. And then the campaign guys wants to do things of bribe voters. The money guy's like, no, we can't do that. So these three people are fighting each other, essentially. And that's how the government structure works in this trifecta. But if you break the trifecta, or one link of it is really weak, or just can't do their job properly, suddenly things start getting wildly out of control. And you start seeing this with the Liberal Party when Butts and Morneau exit, because when Morneau exits, they start going out of control with the money. They start going out of control with economic policies like the immigration system. And I'm not saying Morneau himself was stopping the immigration system from going out of control, but because
in a meeting, he's going to pipe up and say, well, I'm not sure if we can handle that. And now there's nobody who's even making the suggestion that maybe this will be tough.
Yeah. You lose the voice who has in the prestige, what's the word for it? You lose the person with the authority to push back on economic changes, because immigration is essentially an economic policy more in practice. At least, I hope so. I really hope people are not taking immigration as a cultural policy. Like, we need more immigration to culture change. Like, that's a terrible idea. I really hope no one's doing that. But, and then when Butts has exited, you really start seeing the Liberal campaign spiral into the same three things people are making fun of these days because it's so predictable. Guns, abortion, and then tax cuts, or sorry, they're going to cut the spending, they're going to cut your services. That's literally the Liberal campaign. It's literally those three things. They just keep saying them over and over again, thinking it's going to do something.
Oh, and here's the thing that I assume was Jerry Butts's idea. The three modest deficit plan from 2015 is actually like political genius in the sense that be the only guy on the stage willing to say, "Hey, I'm actually willing to spend more than our budget would normally allow for because I think we need to invest in you for you to get ahead." It's nonsense in terms of a practical, public economics standpoint, but it's genius from the standpoint that Tom Mulcair and Harper are trying to out fiscal responsibility each other, and you're like, no, I think we need to invest in ourselves. Again, incoherent, but that's really smart. And yeah, like you can't really name any big moments from the Liberals from the 2019 or 2021 campaigns. It's mostly that those evil conservatives want to take away your abortions and immigration, or not immigration, but your abortions and they want to give your unaborted children guns.
Mm-hmm. So the interesting thing here will be, in this race, just swinging back to today, I think the person who wins this race is the person who's going to be the closest approximation to fixing this trifecta that the Liberals have that's been broken. And none of them can fix it properly. The best candidate that has so far been announced on this might be able to get two positions, because Carney allegedly has Butts working for him. Now, I'm not saying Butts is the only Liberal campaign manager in existence who's like reasonably competent at campaigning, regardless of whether the end results of Jairo Butts' campaigns are good. Whole nother question. The point of the campaign guy is not to deliver good results to the country. It's just to deliver election wins. Allegedly, Mark Carney is going to have Butts on his team, so he might have basically himself as a money guy and then Butts as a campaign guy. None of these people have a leader capability. They're all lieutenants at best to me. Some of them might even be like corporals, if we're going into the military analogy. Like I know people like to say, like, for example, like Anita Anand is she was so better than the last couple of guys on the defense sector, and it's like, yeah, she was like, I guess she was better than Hajan, but like,
I got in such trouble yesterday for calling somebody out for that. Not even calling them out, but I just hate that Zoomerism that you see of people being like, oh man, Mark Carney is really exciting people, and people pretending all these frankly dopey liberals and dopey conservatives too, because I had the same people trying to like cheer for like Scott Aitchison in the 22 campaign of being like, oh, he's so wise and he's the type of very steady hand the conservative. Like, stop trying to hype up these people. They're nobodies. Nobody cares about who Anita Anand is. We can even go to we don't need to go back up to it, but like Anita Anand's like public recognition from people willing to sign up for a political panel online is like 4%. Nobody knows who she is. Oh, but she was actually very good. Oh, the Liberals are missing out on a really great leader. Like, no, they're not. What? A leader's job isn't to like impress policy wonks. It's to lead, and she can't.
Yeah, the only thing you can really say positive about that I can say positive about her is, for someone who has zero background in defense, she was better than the guy before her. But that's really such a low bar.
And by the way, people are trying to give her credit for things that, if we're being honest, are really just things that Trudeau was willing to let be done. Know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Every single thing here that like, oh wow, Anita Anand really got that done. Like, no, she didn't. That she would have stopped if Trudeau said to stop. There's nothing here that she got done. She just simply was allowed to do it. That's literally it. Mm-hmm. As shallow as that sounds.
And that's not even necessarily just a dig at Anand herself, but it's pretty much how cabinets work. Most cabinet ministers are just doing what the leadership said to do. They're not acting. This isn't like the 1800s where cabinet ministers have great latitude and individual responsibility and authority to do things. They're mostly just bureaucrats now that are elected. They just do whatever Primo says.
And it's been like a massive detriment to Canadian politics overall because we don't have party leaders who, probably because of bad advice, will not let people around them make decisions. Because the idea is now that if you let other people make decisions, they could undermine you. So parties have become extremely hierarchical. But I even made the point, and this is something else someone got mad at me for. I just pointed out that a lot of even when people say, "Well, Anita Nand got this done," like, no, she didn't. Her staff did, and that you could say, "Oh, that sounds shallow," because you could always say that. Like, not really. She gets to credit for the macro goals, but they're saying, "Oh, she did really good getting COVID vaccines out." What? No. She's just basically said we need more vaccines, and her underlings would have tried to organize some logistics to acquire them. That's pretty much it.
And the thing with that particular example too is, you to say that she did a good job at it, like a notable good job, right? Like you can say that she did her job, and I think that is completely accurate. But to say she did a good job would mean that she did a better job than a replacement would have. And I just kind of hard to imagine with deploying COVID vaccines that any replacement would have done worse.
Yeah, especially in this on an issue where one could argue, would you even want someone doing a good job with that?
Mm.
Especially because they actually ended up acquiring so many vaccines and they didn't have the logistics to handle them that they ended up having like all of them expire in warehouses and then they just got rid of them all. So like all these people want to be very selective of what does a good job mean, and it really just demonstrates that the entire government sucks. That when you have cheerleaders online just highlighting how stridently liberal this person is, and again we get back to it, if just attention is all we're looking for, or somebody with a forceful personality, how about Mark Garretson as an unironic actual choice? Because like you got nobody else who's anyone's asking to do anything. Like, do you think somebody, if they could pick a dream leader, would pick Mark Carney? No, like they're not that masochistic.
You can kind of see here too, like obviously we have to. Oh, I don't want to oversell this because this is early on. This is going to consolidate a little bit. But you kind of look at this as current liberal supporters, how they see things, or possible liberal switchers. It's telling when Freeland's within margin of error of don't know. And then you start looking back from Freeland and Carney, who are neck and neck, and then everyone else is just an also ran.
And even among 2021 liberal supporters, which certain to vote liberal, that's also not very good. But especially 2021 liberals, people who have voted in the past but might not be wanting to vote liberal this time. Like the thing is that yeah, like don't know is still winning in that one. I think Freeland is it right if I'm looking at it right? The certain to vote liberal, Freeland is only barely edging out don't know with certain to vote liberals.
Yeah.
And like again, it's just a name recognition test at this point because nobody can say, "See, this is her really great moment." I can't name a great moment. Even Kamala Harris had moments compared to Christy Freeland. And I'm not talking about like the Trump leadership debate. I'm talking or a presidential debate. I'm talking about like when she was in Congress,
Mm-hmm.
like grilling Kavanaugh, even though that was a deeply immoral thing to do. She had moments. She could be snarky, where I don't see that Freeland has that ability. Mark Carney is literally just the England version of Michael Ignatieff from the U.S., which I think people are going to realize that actually being from the UK, not being from there, but working there for a lot of years, is probably worse than the US as much as people can be anti-American in Canada. Because, like, that's way farther away and that's not lost on people.
And also, with the UK example, you can point to, like for Ignatieff, the US did perfectly fine relative to the world. Like, yeah, the 2008 recession happened, but they recovered relatively fine, about average. You then compare the UK over the last 20 years. Ooh. It's hard to say the UK did a good job. Like, honestly, being the Bank of England governor is probably a demerit for Carney because the UK's done so bad. Now, is it Mark Carney's fault they've done so bad? I don't know. I'm not as well versed in Bank of England's policies versus the government's policies and all that stuff. But it's safe to say that it's not a good look for you when you're coming from a government system or a government that's done a terrible job. The UK's economy basically hasn't grown in 20 years. Like, that's terrible.
Yeah, and I don't think anyone, I don't think this is lost on literally anybody. I don't think anybody looks at the UK. And the thing is, if he was from a country where his efforts were admired, so like in a year, if there was some Canadian helping out Javier Milei in Argentina, I could see that person being able to make a figure of themselves because that kind of has like a reputational aura to it in a certain sense.
Well, it's interesting.
Yeah.
He's, you because the thing with being interesting, right, is it kind of washes off on people. Like if you are Javier Milei's like economic advisor, the interestingness of him washes off on you because he's an interesting guy, regardless of whether you like him or not. Same thing with Donald Trump. Donald Trump's an interesting person. If you're really close to him, that interesting thing kind of washes off you. It's like, oh yeah, that guy's really closely tied to Trump. That's interesting. But
Even if it's a negative figure, being interesting is a good thing. So not only is the UK bad, oh, I might say like when some people are disliked, because Donald Trump, you could say, is still disliked generally in Canada, but that still makes you seem big. When you go to the UK, when you're somebody from the UK, it's like not only is that not that significant feeling, but you probably did a crappy job too. So that's like really not a great point on your side.
and the one other thing I want to mention here too. So with this preferences here, so you break down in some of these little tables here for these also rans right now, and they're like 3, 5, 4%. And you might think, oh yeah, 4% of people think champagne is interesting. It's like, actually, probably not. First off, this poll probably has a 3% margin of error, so that might just be zero. But also, there are people who will answer polls and troll. Now, don't overtake this. Don't take this the wrong way. Trolling polls is a pretty marginal thing. It's not going to meaningfully change the vote intention polls nationally in a country. You're not going to see a huge difference between like Trudeau and Poilievre because of that. But what it means is when you have these figures that have like zero name recognition, people trolling can cause it to be a wildly different result. Like, I'll take an example of this because this is a case of a very small sample size can cause a really big swing on this. If you look at, let's say, for example, Main Street's polling or other people who publish the poll for quote-unquote gender other groups, those are usually the most people who answer that. I'm pretty sure either misclicking or are trolling Main Street or whatever pollster's answering this.
Or they're getting to the end of the IVR thing and they forget the number, so they just hit the last number mentioned.
Yeah, and you just get hilarious results. Like, you'll have in a Main Street poll be like, aha, 50% of quote unquote gender other are voting conservative. And it's like, I really don't think that's true.
Oh, that happened constantly in BC Conservatives. BC Conservatives were always winning, gender not specified.
And I really don't think that's a true thing. I think it really boils down to people are trolling polls or misclicking, and that really pulls into effect when you have people who are polling at 2%, like Stephen Guilbeault here. That could very well be people misclicking. That could be people trolling, be like, aha, like conservatives will answer the poll from Abacus and be like, who do you want to be leaders? I want the worst guy possible. I want Guilbeault.
Yeah, well, if you had Mark Gerritsen on this list, I guarantee they would never consider it because they know the poll would immediately skew hard towards Mark Gerritsen.
Mm-hmm.
Because every conservative knows who Mark Gerritsen is, and they think he's hilarious.
Mm-hmm.
So everyone would start selecting him. So yeah, it throws off the entire integrity of the poll.
And in case you are wondering, I'm not sure how many people this is, like as a percentage, but there are absolutely people who are going to get memberships in the Liberal Party to troll them by trying to pick the worst leader. Now, I think you shouldn't do that. I think it's really bad for the country when you try to pick the worst possible person to lead a major political party. But there's a reason why places like the Conservative Party have membership fees. Because at least if someone's going to try to troll the party by picking a bad option, they're going to get money from them. But the Liberals don't even have that barrier. And that will happen. Will it change the results? Probably not. But those are people who will be voting in this race.
Well, also the thing I've made this point multiple times too. As much as I like to joke around about like awful leadership candidates, how wouldn't it be funny if Chandra Arya won or something like that? I've told people if you do buy a Liberal membership, vote for Frank Baylis. Vote for the most conservative guy because in the long run for Canada, it's way better for the country to have a Liberal Party that if the Liberals win, we don't need to be like, okay, well, I'm gonna move to Florida. You want somebody who's like not great, but it's a Paul Martin, it's a Jean Chrétien, it's somebody who will do the right thing when it's obvious what to do the right thing on. I won't agree with all their decisions, but it's like makes sense what they're doing some of the time. Whereas like don't cheer on those who are seeking to destroy you as a person. Please do not do that.
Yes, you should all. If you're going to vote in a leadership race, you should always be voting for the person that of that slate of candidates you think would be your favorite person. Always. Doesn't matter what party it is. It could be a party you never hope to vote for. But you should try to put the person you like the most in charge of that party. Because if they somehow win an election, then you'll be the least disappointed.
Yeah, and by the way, conservatives individuals actually did this in the Green Party's leadership when Anami Paul won because she wasn't David Lascaris, who's not even kidding, is an actual borderline Russian agent. Like he is this weirdo, anti-Semitic, Russian propagandist, uh, like like crazy person, far left Antifa type. And like the conservatives voted in Anami Paul because she's not insane. And I think that over time, that's probably been good for the party that Damien Lascaris didn't become the Green Party leader. Because if he becomes the Green Party leader, no chance he steps down to let Elizabeth May come back later.
Mm-hmm.
And Elizabeth May is not good, but she's also not Damien Lascaris.
Yep, it's always best. You saw this kind of in the U.S. a while back. Back in 2020, in the Democratic primary, there were a lot of Republicans or Republican-aligned people not just saying, "Oh, well, I'm going to vote for Bernie because it's bad for the Democrats." Like they were unironically pushing this position. They were advocating for this position, and it's crazy to me because if you are a Republican in the U.S., Bernie is like the most not Republican Democrat candidate that you could have picked. Why would you want that guy to be the leader of the party who has, at worst, like a 40% chance of winning a general election?
And the thing is, yeah, like when Biden won by such a large margin, there was no doubt Bernie Sanders had a chance to win.
Yeah.
And so, like, you always have to remember whenever you're trying to vote in another party's leadership or any leadership, you are potentially choosing the form of your destructor. So, just make sure that you know what you're getting into when you're voting for the people that you're voting for. But yeah, I guess that's my last point for the podcast since I probably have to go here in a bit.
Yeah, we'll wrap that up here. If you guys like this video, I mean, go off, do your YouTube things, like, share, subscribe, comment below. If you want, we might be able to do another one of these before the leadership race ends, but we'll see how people react and what the time schedules look like. But with that, we'll bail out for the day. So see you guys later.